Are you going to cover up?
No,
Are you going to continue to cover up for the rich and powerful men, including those that might be on this committee?
I can yell too, Mr. Chairman, but I don't want to yell above this.
The time belongs to the gentleman from New Jersey. I appreciate the gentlelady yielding back.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal leveled a stunning accusation against the FBI director, claiming he was actively covering up evidence after Donald Trump's name appeared in the Epstein files. This wasn't some policy squabble behind closed doors. It happened in full view of the cameras, a political eruption that sent shockwaves through the packed hearing room, rattled the press corps, and most importantly, hit home for the survivors watching. At the center of it all, a leather-bound volume known as the Birthday Book, assembled for Epstein's 50th, containing handwritten notes from high-profile friends. One page, subpoenaed just days earlier from the Epstein estate, allegedly included a 2003 letter signed by Donald J. Trump, accompanied by what appeared to be a crude sketch of a nude female figure. Trump says the signature was forged. But when pressed under oath, FBI Director Kash Patel admitted he hadn't even looked at all the Epstein files. Not some vague report from a junior agent. He hadn't personally reviewed the archive he sealed.
So the answer is no one?
For the information that we have.
In the files?
In the case file.
Okay.
That revelation hit like a jolt. This wasn't just about whether Trump wrote a birthday message to a now infamous financier. It was about who the government was willing to protect. When Jayapal and Rep. Jared Moskowitz asked whether the FBI was actively investigating the Birthday Book or its contributors, Patel gave no clear answer. "We've released everything the courts have allowed," he repeated. But that wasn't the question. The question was whether the signature, the artwork, and the context surrounding it were being treated as evidence, or swept aside as inconvenience. When Patel finally said, "Sure, I'll do it," in response to a sarcastic demand to investigate the Epstein estate for distributing fake documents, it didn't sound like confidence. It sounded like someone cornered. The cracks widened when Patel's own testimony contradicted his previous statements. He had once promised, quote, "no stone left unturned," but under oath he acknowledged that more than 300 gigabytes of Epstein-related data were sealed, unpublished, and off-limits to the public. That's not scraps. That's not redacted fragments. That's an entire hard drive's worth of correspondence, testimony, and digital records. And the defense? Patel said that much of it had already been reviewed by unnamed prosecutors from prior administrations who supposedly found nothing credible. The same administrations he had previously accused of orchestrating a coordinated cover-up.
Would it be fair to say that Mr. Epstein trafficked young women, including, in some instances, minors, for sex to himself?
That was specifically the allegations in the 2018 indictment in the Southern District of New York.
That's where the moral outrage started to seep in. Because we're not just talking about documents, we're talking about survivors, women who say they were trafficked to at least 20 men. Not rumors, not anonymous leaks. These are on-record accounts given to federal agents. Virginia Giuffre, who publicly accused British royalty before her tragic passing in April, had also identified others she claimed were involved. And yet, when questioned about whether these women were credible, Patel ducked. He cited vague legal standards, deferred to past prosecutors, and repeatedly refused to give a direct answer. As if credibility is a legal technicality, not a question of basic humanity.
These are women who came to the Hill and testified that they were groomed and at the age of 14 and 16 years old, and they called to meet with the president and to meet with the FBI and to have people investigate their claims. Some of them have never testified before. If you are so interested in getting the public to submit any information, why have you not met with them?
Jayapal wasn't having it. She sharpened in and dropped one line that sliced straight through the political noise. "Mr. Patel, are the victims credible?" That moment sucked the air out of the room. He dodged again, tossing up legal jargon like a smokescreen. Meanwhile, survivors sat just outside the hearing chamber. Some of them had flown in just to be there. Some had offered to testify. None had been invited inside. And when the top official in charge of the investigation can't say whether they're credible, that's not just an oversight, that's a signal. Even some Republicans started squirming. Thomas Massie, a known conservative firebrand, openly questioned Patel's use of the term "no credible evidence." Massie cited interviews where women named names, at least 20 men they claim Epstein trafficked them to. Massie wasn't trying to make headlines. He was asking how that level of detail didn't even meet the FBI's threshold for follow-up. Patel's response? That those names were dismissed by previous officials, the same ones he used to accuse of burying this entire case. The contradiction wasn't subtle, it was blaring.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I'm going to run out of time. You've seen most of the files. Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself?
Himself. There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
And then came the moment that changed the entire tenor of the hearing. Jayapal, refusing to let Patel off the hook, pressed again. Are these women credible? Yes or no? What followed wasn't a yes. It wasn't even a no. It was a long, filibustered shuffle through legal precedent and departmental procedure, the kind of answer designed to sound like clarity while saying absolutely nothing. We are reviewing all credible new information, Patel said over and over, like a broken loop. But the truth was bleeding through. He hadn't spoken to most of these women, he hadn't read all the files, and he was leaning on the conclusions of prosecutors he once branded as co-conspirators in a political cover-up.
You are not answering the question. The question is,
you just don't like the answer.
Are these women credible? It's a yes or no answer.
I have answered the question.
Well,
and
what is the answer?
I keep telling you, I'm the only FBI director that has welcomed new information in this case. This administration is the only one that has welcomed any new information in this case.
Is there a yes or no to
present
whether the
new credible
victims are
information?
credible?
The survivors saw it for what it was. A joint statement from 12 of them, released the next morning, called Patel's performance shocking and disrespectful. They pointed out that even the limited public records contradict his claims. Names were given, locations, dates, flights, logs, and most damning of all, statements to the FBI, many of which, according to Massey and others, haven't even been included in the public disclosures. So what's hiding in the rest of those 300 gigabytes?
Your July memo says you uncovered more than 300 gigabytes of data and physical evidence, but that you had decided no further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted. That is a quote. I think what happened, Mr. Patel, is that suddenly you discovered that Donald Trump's name was all over these files, and you started a giant cover-up.
Insiders familiar with the Justice Department's internal briefings say there was mounting pressure over the summer to redact any mention of Trump's presence in the Epstein network. Some of that pressure allegedly came directly from Attorney General Pam Bondi's office, which is said to have met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago in May, weeks before the birthday book surfaced. According to reports cited during the hearing, Bondi allegedly told Trump that his name appeared multiple times and that the DOJ did not plan to release the full files. Patel said he couldn't speak to Bondi's conversations, but he didn't deny they happened, and he didn't deny that the president's name came up.
So you are under oath, Mr. Patel. You just testified to Mr. Swalwell that you did not speak to the president about the Epstein files. To your knowledge, did Attorney General Pam Bondi speak to the president about what was in the Epstein files?
I can't speak for Attorney General Pam Bondi.
Meanwhile, public promises of transparency started unraveling. In July, Patel and Bondi released a memo stating that no further disclosures would be appropriate or warranted, citing legal and ethical concerns. But that was before the birthday book, before the sketch, before the testimonies pointing to individuals never publicly named, and before lawmakers like Jayapal and Moskowitz started asking whether this was about legality or damage control.
So you're releasing them a little bit at a time, is that correct?
We're releasing as much as we can, but we are limited by 3 different court orders, and the department went back to each of those judges to waive those court orders or have them lifted, and each of those judges declined.
This wasn't some tabloid leak splashed across late-night cable. This was an FBI director under oath, unable to explain why survivors weren't met, why documents were sealed, and why the same prosecutors he used to criticize are now the backbone of his defense. And every time the name Trump surfaced, Patel's answers got thinner. First it was, I haven't reviewed the file. Then it was, the courts won't let us release it. And finally, we're not going to release downloaded content. It's a moving target, one that seems to shift whenever the pressure increases.
I want to ask you about the Epstein files. Have you seen the Epstein files?
I have not reviewed the entirety of it myself, but a good amount.
Even the FBI's own internal procedures raise eyebrows here. Under Patel's leadership, agents were pulled from counter-terror and substance interdiction units to process Epstein materials. That alone sent up flares. Why would that level of resource be needed for a case the director insists is basically closed? One source within the agency told a reporter last week that entire teams were tasked with combing through files for reputational risk, not criminality. That's a very different mandate than what the public was told. And behind that contradiction is a bigger question. Who is being protected? Because this isn't just about Trump. Other names, according to sources close to the Oversight Committee, include executives from finance, tech, and media, names that haven't been released and may never be. If Patel's standard for credibility is based solely on what 3 administrations already chose to ignore, then nothing new ever stands a chance of being believed.
Will you release all of them, or at least as many as you can?
We will release everything we are legally permitted to do so. We are continuing to work with the House on the subpoena request. We have substantially complied with it, but we will continue to release whatever we are legally permitted to do so.
That's what makes Jayapal's line of questioning so damning. It pierced the legalistic fog and asked what the public deserves to know, not just about what happened on Epstein's planes and islands, but about what our institutions are willing to cover up to preserve reputations. When the director of the FBI can't say whether women who were trafficked as teenagers are telling the truth, when he hasn't read all the files, when he's willing to let unnamed prosecutors define what counts as real, that's not neutrality, that's complicity. And as the hearing spiraled into shouting, we saw something rare. Not just bipartisan disgust, but bipartisan disbelief. When Republican lawmakers start accusing their own administration of stonewalling, it means the scandal has outgrown the party lines. And that's where things get dangerous, for everyone involved. Because if even Massey is demanding answers, if survivors are speaking out, if documents are surfacing faster than Patel can redact them, then something's slipping.
About cover-ups. And I will take as much time as I want.
Where were you during the Obama and Biden administrations when these so-called cover-ups were going on? Why didn't anyone in those administrations talk to any of these purported witnesses? I have
some regular order,
every single person to provide credible information.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from Washington.
And I'm going to take another couple of minutes.
When you accuse the witness of something, he's allowed to respond. That's how it works.
Listen, he didn't even, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, you have always been fair.
After that hearing, the temperature in Washington changed overnight. It wasn't just political friction anymore, it was backlash, full force. Within hours, the survivors released a joint statement slamming FBI Director Kash Patel's testimony as shocking, accusing him of erasing their trauma and minimizing their stories. They weren't the only ones. Lawmakers, staffers, even former federal prosecutors were openly questioning how the man who once called Epstein's case unfinished business was now quoting legal roadblocks like a human firewall. What changed? Because something clearly had. We all remember how Patel entered the job. He rode in on a wave of promises. Total transparency, justice without delay, no sacred cows. But within weeks of taking office, his tone started to shift. The line that stuck hardest came during that hearing. We are not going to release downloaded. Delivered like a mic drop, but it landed like a smokescreen. It wasn't just crude, it was evasive. What he didn't say was that the same archive he now deemed too sensitive to disclose had already been logged, processed, and summarized in his own July memo. That memo described digital and physical evidence sourced from the Epstein estate now locked away with no timeline for review. So why pretend it was suddenly untouchable?
In response to Mr. Massey's question, you appear to say that the survivors were not credible. These are survivors.
That's not at all what I said.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask you this in a second, but let me tell you about the survivors, and let's bring them up here into the room.
The deeper we look, the more that pivot seems strategic. Sources close to the Justice Department allege Patel faced direct pressure from Trump's inner circle right after the birthday book surfaced. The same week it landed in congressional hands, whispers began circulating that internal communications had been flagged. Emails, text threads, maybe even photos that tied Trump more directly to Epstein than previously known. Was that true? We haven't seen the files, but we know this. Soon after, the FBI's internal posture changed from release everything to release nothing without court order. Meanwhile, the White House didn't stay silent. Spokesperson Abigail Jackson lashed out, accusing Democrats of using survivors as political pawns. She said, quote, "The real hoax is that the Democrats are now using these victims to deflect from their party's spectacular downfall." But that pushback didn't land the way it used to, because inside the FBI itself, the atmosphere had shifted. According to 2 officials familiar with the agency's Epstein task force, the team was split. Some believe Patel's move to classify the remaining 300 gigabytes was self-preservation. Others called it obstruction in plain sight. And that data isn't abstract. It includes travel records, financial trails, internal logs from Epstein's private pilots, and raw footage recovered from properties in New York and the Virgin Islands.
As the FBI director is to
Is
invite
the
all
answer yes or
investigative
no
leads.
to whether or not you met with these women who were abused and
Any insinuation by you or any
What
people
is
on
the
your
an-
side that I am not manhunting child predators and figures, just look at the
Mr.
stats.
Patel,
And you talk
Mr.
about
Chairman,
cover-ups, man.
This is where the case takes a darker turn. Because for all the arguing over signatures and sketches, it still circles back to a basic question that Kash Patel couldn't or wouldn't answer. Are the victims credible? The silence in that moment wasn't just uncomfortable, it was revealing. Because if the answer is yes, then the government failed to act on allegations involving at least 20 men. If the answer is no, then we have to ask why these women, some of whom passed polygraphs and gave interviews under oath, would fabricate stories they never monetized. It's one of the oldest tactics in crisis management. When you can't challenge the facts, challenge the credibility. And Patel leaned into that playbook without ever putting his name on the judgment. But these aren't anonymous voices. Virginia Giuffre, who identified Epstein's circle before any charges were ever filed, described being trafficked to men whose names still haven't appeared in any indictment. Other survivors echoed that claim. Court documents from the Maxwell trial reference non-redacted identities that were withheld for ongoing investigation. And yet, no updates, no arrests, no charges. So when Patel says no credible evidence, it's not just tone deaf, it contradicts the very testimony that led to Maxwell's conviction in the first place. Let's not forget, this same man once called the Epstein scandal the biggest investigative failure of the 21st century. That was before he became director. Back when he said the Justice Department needed house cleaning. Now, with the power to open every file and subpoena every witness, he's locked the door. And he didn't just toss the key, he buried it under a mountain of procedural red tape. Why? That's the question circling every newsroom, every closed-door meeting, every late-night segment. Why would a former Trump ally, now holding the highest law enforcement post in the country, risk his entire credibility to shield a pile of sealed documents? The timing isn't subtle. Trump's campaign is already dealing with blowback over the Epstein ties resurfacing. Abigail Jackson's defense didn't deny that Trump and Epstein were close for over a decade. Instead, it framed Trump as the only one demanding transparency, until he wasn't.
Mr. Patel, are the victims of the Jeffrey Epstein horrific trafficking ring, are they credible?
Any person with information about ongoing trafficking.
I'm asking you if they're credible.
Ma'am, I'm
Are
commenting
they
on the
credible?
evidence we have.
But
And we have routinely asked for people to come forward with more evidence, and we will look at it.
So what changed? According to insiders, it was the birthday book. That small leather volume, forgotten for years, is now the Rosetta Stone of this scandal. Handwritten notes, original signatures, private drawings, and one message that reportedly includes a poem about power and pleasure, allegedly signed DJT. Is it authentic? We don't know. But the fact that it even exists and that the FBI won't confirm whether it's being analyzed speaks volumes, especially since Patel himself, under questioning, wouldn't even say how many times Trump's name appears in the Epstein files. Not because he was protecting an investigation, but because, in his own words, I have not personally reviewed that portion. So what has he reviewed, and why were nearly a dozen survivor affidavits left out of the July disclosure? Remember, these are sworn statements submitted years ago that name names. According to committee staffers, some of these names reappear in travel logs and in Epstein's phone records. That's not conjecture, that's data. Yet Patel chose to reclassify those files, citing risk to ongoing diplomatic and financial interests. What does that mean? No one at the department will say.
Let me tell you that the Wall Street Journal reported that in May, Bondi told Trump that he was in the Epstein files, and at the same meeting said that the DOJ did not plan to release the files. Yesterday, you testified to Senator Kennedy that there was, quote, no credible information that Epstein trafficked girls to anyone else, and that you have, quote, continuously and publicly asked the public to come forward with more information, and we'll look into it.
And it gets worse. Multiple agents assigned to the Epstein file have since been reassigned, not fired, just relocated, away from the task force, away from the case. In one instance, a career agent who specialized in trafficking networks was moved to a cybercrime unit in Montana. When asked why, no explanation was given. Coincidence or cleanup? This isn't just about the past anymore. It's about whether the institutions sworn to pursue truth are actively burying it. Jayapal's question wasn't rhetorical. Are the victims credible? That's the line. That's the line that every official, every reporter, every one of us needs to hold. Because if these women are telling the truth and the files support their claims, then Patel's silence isn't just bureaucratic caution. It's protection, but protection for whom? And if this birthday book is real, and if Trump's name really sits inside those sealed files, then how deep does the shielding go? Are we looking at a cover-up coordinated across multiple agencies? Or is this just one man playing defense for a political legacy that can't afford another scandal? Because right now, even people who once supported Patel are asking the same thing. What's in those files that's worth destroying his reputation over? So here's the question that haunts all of this. If the public never sees what's behind those redactions, how will we ever know who was really involved in Epstein's network and who just made sure we never found out? If you're still watching, then you already know this story isn't over. In fact, it's just getting more dangerous. What happens when a scandal this big starts implicating people at the top? Who gets thrown under the bus and who walks away untouched? Drop a comment and tell us, is this a legal defense or a legacy cleanup? And if you were in that hearing room, what would you have asked Patel? Until next time, stay alert, stay loud, and never let silence win.